Welcome everybody. In today's roundtable discussion. Our topic today is elevating private label profitably through strategic refinements. And my name is Ye, and I'm a fashion business consultant specializing in building private labels and driving revenue and customer loyalty, as well as I work with aspiring entrepreneurs to help them start and build their businesses and brands into profit. And I'm also focusing on really taking the private labels that are not just, that it's not just becomes a trend and that we are seeing across majority of retailers, but really I'm pointing them to our building into a long-term brand value. And unlocking profitability isn't always as straightforward as it seems. Today, we're going to really talk a little bit about some of the strategies, and which also is really highly applicable to anything that you are creating potentially as a house brand or potentially as a standalone direct-to-consumer brand. So a lot of these strategies are very applicable. Hi, Samuel. It's good to see you. Really welcome back. It's been a while since you joined last, so really great to see you. All right. So, and one of the things we are seeing, many fashion businesses really struggle with margin, quality control, and brand positioning. So, in today's discussion, we really would like to dive deep into how to refine your private label strategies to sustain profitability. And this is going to be, like I mentioned, an interactive session. So, I really encourage you to jump in, ask questions, and share your experiences as well. So let's start by going really through the room. And I heard like some of you guys already did a little bit of a brief discussion, but an introductory. But since it is a networking event, feel free to drop in your contact information in the chat, as well as your biggest challenge that you're trying to solve this year. It will be really good for all of us to kind of get to know each other. Samuel is new to the group, so I'd love to, Sam, for you to be able to introduce yourself as well, so that everyone knows who you are and what you do.
Yes, my name is Samuel Alexander. I am the CEO of C2C Fashion and Technology. We are a global fashion and technology ecosystem that we are specializing in smart products, smart networks, and smart factories, developing products for the smart cities. I work with private industry, government, and education to help bring the fashion and tech industries together.
Thank you, Sam. Really a treat to have you on the calls. So I'm really excited that you're here. One of the things that I'd love to really start off is talking about one of the biggest mistakes that we see brands make with private label, while they're treating them as an extra inventory rather than a strategic curated collections. If your private label products aren't designed with the data-driven insights, you're basically gambling on your bottom line profitability. Many brands rely on historical sales data to inform their decisions, to understand of what customer really resonates and look forward for their assortment, so that they can identify our key drivers to which you want to form your private label on. But really, in today's landscape, we need to go beyond simple spreadsheets of thinking about what the historical data tells us in terms of what the customer responds, but really thinking about also predictive analytics and real-time customer sentiment analysis, to really have them understand of how do we able to deliver products, or especially through our private label, that's not just value driven in terms of price, but can actually really connect with the customer and really potentially power the advanced designs and assortment strategies to be able to really ensure that when we are launching the private label, it immediately resonates with the audience. Really thinking about gathering the data from multiple touch points, whether you are omni-channel retail, social media, sentiment, loyalty programs, thinking about how your customer, what their actual need is, and so that you could be able to solve that with your private label, outside of just creating a product that is a knockoff of what's already well performing for you on the floors. Allowing you to pinpoint really exact features that turn casual shoppers into brand ambassadors. Really, and let's talk a little bit about break down some of those key points that we really want to think about as we starting to analyze and figure out what our product private label assortment really needs to look like, and really be able to how it can be able to relate that to the customer. Remember, private label is a customer acquisition machine, and our goal is to really have their customer, your consumer, is to fall in love with your private label brand. The reason is because then you'll have them a loyalty for them to come back year over year and buy your product. While on the flip side, if you're really just focusing on the products that do really well and you are creating a product now just a better value with a better price point, but really not connecting with the consumer, then your brand becomes very easily replaceable by another retailer who potentially might come up with their private label around the same product with the same goal of delivering better price point for their customer for that product that sells. So if you really want to stay in the game and think about the long-term loyalty of the customer, you have to be able to emotionally connect to the customer, not and provide value, not just based on the price point, but potentially and quality, potentially of the fact that you are solving a specific need, or maybe you're perfecting your fit in a way where all of the other vendors that you're carrying products from are not able to do it. Now, private label is never going to be the most fashionable or the most trendiest collections or product assortments that you're going to create. They're going to be really more about thoughtful process understanding of what customer really is looking for and really gravitates for from your brand, and at the same time how you can maximize and deliver the maximum value to that customer beyond just the price point. And so thinking about those aspects are going to be very critical. Sam, I know you are very much in the private label world and connected to private labels in general. I mean, what kind of trends do you foresee and or see that potentially our listeners could be able to learn from when it comes to really understanding how do we want to navigate and deliver maximum value to the customers through our private label programs?
Sure. In the private label area, it's really one of the most difficult areas to really develop. And originally in my career, we worked with a lot of department stores that were creating their own private labels for the department stores, but then they quickly got out of it because they realized that it takes some creative skills to be able to come up with the right products for the consumer at the right time. So what we're looking at now is reshoring everything back to the U.S. because the minimums are so high at the factories in Asia. And then also, when you do have to get a smaller minimum, they charge you premiums on it to get smaller quantities. And then you're limited to your resources and the fabrics and things that you have there. So what we're doing is we're bringing everything back here, and we're developing factories here in the U.S., but we're also developing sustainable factories with products on demand. So you will be able to coordinate small runs, 15, 20 units at a time on products and gray goods that we have, that we can also use all different types of printing processes that we have now to create different types of fashion for you. So that's what our focus is as far as for private label. And it's going to be a lot more focused in on smaller quantities and higher varieties of items. And that's the weakness of private label, is that you have a limitation of the piece goods that you're looking at the factories in China. And then you also have the higher price point because of the smaller quantities. They charge you multiple price points on that.
100%. And you just brought up a really great point, is this is really becomes a great opportunity for retailers to also bring in something that they could be claiming themselves as US made, right? Where you are potentially carrying a plethora of different vendors and suppliers of products that are coming not necessarily just from China, but potentially coming from all over the world. But right now, there's really a big movement of, made in the USA, made kind of localized manufacturing, and really bringing the trade back into our country. So could be an opportunity for some of the retailers or private label programs to think about how you can also maximize the value to your consumer beyond the price point. Is can you bring that product and make it in the United States? as one of your selling points and really be able to emotionally connect with that customer who is truly wants to invest in their development of their trades within their country. You brought a really great point. The other things that we want to take a look at is as we're thinking about what our assortment potentially should look like for the private label. Obviously we use the sales data to undefine the winning products. And that is the number one must have that we have to start with, right? We have to understand, based on our historicals, what are the 20% of the assortment that drives 80% of your revenue? This would be the framework of within which you're going to stay and kind of stationary your private label initial assortments to then from there you're going to pivot and expand on the winning categories and the winning products. But the other thing that we often underlook is to leverage the customer's reviews and direct feedback. You're going to be able to learn so much from just understanding what the customers are saying from the product about the product that they're buying from you already. Even especially that you are now identified the 20%, which is your core assortment from which you're potentially going to focus your private label on. Now you want to dive deeper and understand what are the customers' reviews are on that particular product and what are the customer pain points are. A lot of times we're going to see pain points quality. A lot of times we're going to see a pain point of the customer that the product doesn't fit right, whether it fits too big, whether it fits too small. Those would be the two primary reasons that you're going to see within those particular feedbacks and comments. And that's a really great tool for you to understand when you are starting to create your private label based on that 20% assortment, what things that you really have to be hyper focused on. So if your customer consistently bringing up in the customer reviews and direct feedback that the fit is not 100% or the fit is too big, too short, too small, too tight, or the fabric is too loose, or the fabric is pilling, or the fabric doesn't have the right quality that they anticipated when they actually looked at the product, especially if you're selling it online. Those would be great indicators for you to take back to the product development team to really say, hey guys, this is one of our primary KPIs that we need to get the fit right. We need to get the fit right for our customer. And this is where the data's collection starts to happen really to understand your customer demographic, your customer potentially average fit. And now, are they more contemporary fit? Are they more missy fit and more the junior fit? But even within those categories, you will have a broad spectrum of what those fits are. So potentially we want to take a deeper study of taking the products that we know we want to focus on, get them from all of our existing suppliers, but in addition to also competitively shop those particular products from other direct and indirect competitors. Take a moment and actually spend time in the fitting sessions to try those on based on your fit models that fit your actual demographic, your customer demographic. Remember, Midwest customer demographic sizing will be very different from West Coast and East Coast. So you really have to really understand what is the 20% of your customer that drives 80% of your revenue, right? So going back to that analytics of the sales data and which regions are they coming from. This can also be able to give you an indicator of what the type of fit you potentially need to create. So once you did all those digging and studies, that's when you establish your base fit. And then that's what you want to pass on to your private label product development team, so that in technical teams, so that you are creating the product that actually fits your customer needs and right in their sizing and their needs. One of the other things that we're starting to see a lot is the AI version of analyzation of fits and making the recommendations of what type of product that actually would be able to fit specifically to the consumer by them doing a body scan with their phones. I mean, this is another great new technology that's coming out for us to think about, especially for if we are in that retail space and we are dealing with categories that have a high return rate. This is a potentially something we want to apply to our private label so that we are going to be able to even put another step forward of helping to identify what exact product size and fit would work from our private label categories to your consumer, to specifically to their consumer, where they can actually, like I mentioned, scan it with their phone. excuse me, excuse me, I apologize. One of the other things we want to think about is to avoid to have too many SKUs in your private label, because too many SKUs will really dilute the focus and really lead unnecessary inventory costs. So this is why we always talk about focus your private label on that 80-20 rule, right? Based on what is the 20% that drives 80% of your total revenue, and focus your private label within that segment. Do not try to be fancy. Do not try to be trendy. Do not try to be, fashion forward on your private label products, on your private label assortments, because that's going to be a lot of trial and error, and most likely you're not going to be profitable and will not ROI with all the investment you have to put in order for you to even build the private label and actually take it off the ground. The another things we want to think about is, like we mentioned earlier, is the predictive analytics and demand forecasting. Really, there's a lot of really great AI tool models that are really predicting product performance before the large scale production happens. We are now talking about the supply chain that uses the predictive analytics and actually can forecast your production to demand as little as 2 weeks, so that you are able to then produce in increments of 2 weeks production versus actually committing to a really large sum of inventory up front. Really identifying the micro trends and real time, color silhouette searches to pivot quickly. This is going to be another really critical piece that can help us with that. Predictive analytics can help us and really that navigate where we potentially want to pivot and how we want to shift our assortment. Really thinking about the customer persona segments and co-creation, really understanding your customer, especially if you're a large retailer, you potentially have multiple customer personas. So really understanding who the private label going to serve, which customer persona the private label is going to serve. Don't try to have your private label serve all the customers that you potentially have within your brand, within your retail brand. The really segment and create capsules of private labels. And even if you have to create two different private labels to service one customer personas versus the other, that would be a better solution than trying to cram everything at once. Because whether you are house brand or whether you are private label brand, you want to make sure that the customer understands it and that it's focused on, again, serving their needs. So, and it drives the maximum value in order for them to be able to really connect with your brand, and outside of just it being a better price point, as an example. Is anyone on this call kind of are, whether you are a consumer of private label brands and you guys are seeing kind of similar trends and how that actually resonates with you from the consumer perspective? I'd love to hear that as well. Chantel, Myra, do you guys have any insight from the consumer point as you guys are shopping private label brands from other retailers? What factors do you see that are really important to you as a consumer to be able to hopefully relate some of those messages to people who are building private labels? Chantel, you want to add on your thoughts?
Sorry, say that one more time.
So from the consumer perspective, right? Because I'm sure you shop a lot of private label brands from retailers as well. Where do you think would be the most critical things that you would see that they do really well because they're serving your needs and they're actually able to speak and connect with you, versus potentially some that might not do it as good of a job?
Their value, whether it's where it's speaking to me from an emotional standpoint or representation. So maybe filling a need that I don't see anywhere else. That's where they come in and speak the loudest.
Very good, very good. 100% agree. Maya, what about you? Do you have anything to add?
Um, I came from a private label background initially, so I'm kind of observing more from the perspective of designing private label, even though now I'm doing less of that. So I kind of am just sitting in as more of an observer. I'll definitely have more information to say. I'm actually switching over to my phone, so I'm sorry for any interruptions, but I'm switching to my phone so I can carry with me to my next appointment.
No worries, no
So
worries.
I'm,
Absolutely.
yeah.
Absolutely.
Recording in progress.
Thank you very much. All right, guys, and I see that there we have few new players as well that are coming in into our roundtable. So welcome. Really would love to just welcome everyone who is joining in. Joelle, where are you joining us from?
Hello, I'm joined from Nigeria.
All right, perfect. And then you're a manufacturer?
Yes,
What kind of product do you guys manufacture?
we're into e-commerce basically, like e-commerce product.
E-commerce product. So you do apparel, accessories. What are you focusing on?
We're focusing on selling gadgets like tech gadgets,
Okay,
laptops, phones.
okay. Good. All right. Thank you. Well, welcome. And then Linda, I'd like to welcome you as well. Thank you for joining us. Where are you joining us from? Linda? Oh, I think her audio is still connecting. Let's give her a second. All right. Well, meanwhile, I'm having some questions that are trickling in from our live broadcasting. So one of the good questions that just came in, we operate on multiple channels, online, offline, and through wholesale partnerships. How do you unify all these data streams? Perfect question. And this is actually a lot of times what we're seeing when we start to optimizing the end-to-end processes for a lot of our retailers, especially who's dealing with private label. Really, one of the things we often recommend is to invest in a centralized centralized platform that collects all of the data and helps to unify all of your commerce platforms and aggregates the data from all the sales touch points. The goal is really to have a single source of truth for real-time inventory, for customer behavior, and conversion matrix. So if you are, for example, on a Shopify and Amazon, and potentially also doing some of the offline, brick and mortar sales, and you are tracking your inventory separately, which we often surprisingly still see that this is happening. You got to be able to figure out how to centralize it, whether you do that through ERP system, whether you do that through the cloud solutions in the back end that helps you manage inventory and really centralize all your sales channels and touch points to be able to withdraw the data and be able to analyze it and then equally distribute it once, among what the sales channels that you're performing. This would be the best way to do this. If you're currently not centralizing your data, that is going to be an important factor that needs to be done. Linda, it looks like your audio now is working. Do you want to quickly introduce yourself to the roundtable? Maybe not, still connecting. All right, so we're moving on. There's another question that came in that I really love to address. How do I collect meaningful customer data beyond just looking at the sales report? Really great question. Start with multiple touch points. Really analyze your customer reviews like we've just talked about. Conduct, post-purchases surveys. It's another great way of collecting data from your customer, and track your abandoned cart. You're also going to be able to understand whether which products that are being added to the cart but never actually being purchased. And there could be different reasons. Some could be technical reasons. Some could be because you gave them too many or choices versus and choices, which means potentially your assortment is too broad, or they were not able to really emotionally connect or have enough information for them to actually go and actually buy that product while just adding it instead of just adding it to the cart. If you have a physical retail presence, pay attention to which product customers ask about the most. That could be another really great insight, and especially if you are, on the floors You talk to your floor managers, talk to your retail managers, so that they could be able to really give that insight to you and your team, especially as you are starting to develop your private label. You can also run a lot of A/B testings on products listings to see which one generates the most interest or conversion. That's another great way of collecting data beyond just the sales data that you're going to analyze. The next thing I really want us to really talk about is the quality control for kind of margin growth, really thinking about balancing your cost, quality, and speed, right? So we often think about private label, it's a value driver based on getting a lower cost to the consumer for them to be able to get the same product that they're potentially getting it from the branded products. Well, margins are often really really connected with the quality issues, right? So not just the production cost. We really want to think about really about single bad batch that you have ever created or your team ever created, and how much really it costed you in thousands of dollars in returns. And then you potentially jeopardized your customer trust, or you potentially even lost sales. But you don't really have to choose between the cost cutting and the quality. You really need to do the right balance between scale and profitability. So Samuel, I'd love to hear from you, because that's exactly right up in your in your specialty, because you guys constantly getting that balance right between the costing and the price of the production, especially made in the USA, versus the quality that the consumer actually gets for that price. How do you guys manage that and this levels of the expectations, especially of the private labels that are potentially want to bring their production to the United States?
What you're talking about is value, and how do you create that value for that customer? And right now, the balance of value is moving away from a quantitative life to a quality of life. So your customers have to be geared at a need for the quality of life for the consumer now. And then you also have to show a longevity in the product so that it gives them a time period to wear that product and have a quality of life with it. So that's the area that we're focusing on in that area now, just quality of life. What is it that's going to bring them a quality of life now?
And how do you guys do that in terms of, I mean, just so that I know it, but just so that the listeners are able to kind of see how you guys are overcoming that particular challenge and bringing the quality of life is, I'd love to hear so that you can mention it about all the tech that you're integrating in your products.
Okay. I didn't want to really get into in depth into that. I knew that I didn't want to take away from what you're doing, because I know you put on a specific area. But a lot of what we're doing now is on-demand customization, and a lot of the companies that I work with are APIs. And the problem with the industry right now is the fashion industry doesn't understand technology, and the technology industry doesn't understand the fashion industry. And the problem is the fashion industry is a $2.5 trillion industry, so we're not anybody to be laughed at. But we don't have a whole lot of technology built into our industry. So this is an opportune time now for young designers to really prosper, because the big guys are not agile enough to keep up with what's going on at the consumer level. And the consumer now is really focused in on a quality of life, because inflation is killing their quality of life. They don't even, it's not even realistic to try to look at a quality of life anymore. So a quality of life, we're looking at a quality of life. So if you can focus your products on-demand customization and using the AI technology for that, then that's going to give you an edge over the larger guys, because mass production is costing them a lot of money to make those inventories and warehouse them and keep up with those inventories. And the focus right now is building factories here for on-demand customization, not just for small runs, but for customization on demand by the consumer and by the retailer, so that the retailers can create their private label and not have to bring in 1,000 pieces. They can bring in 30, 40 pieces at a time and be able to replenish those goods and not have to wait 3 months to get goods from China and from whatever part of the world you're bringing them in from. You get them in 2 weeks. So that's going to be the advantage of having production back here in the U.S. The biggest problem that we're running into right now is the skill sets of the people here. Everything else is automated. The only place that's not automated is the sewing. And as everyone knows, that's the art. Anybody can pretty much design a product, but to be able to make it and bring it to reality, that's where the real true skill sets come in. And so that's what we're focusing on now, is really building the skill sets within the stores. And we're using a lot of the immigrants here that are coming into the country for that. giving them training in the new technologies. Like Juki has a lot of new machines that they're bringing in right now, especially in the automation part of it. They've got a lot of automation built into their new sewing machine. So you're having to train people on new skill sets. And that's where we're running into problems, getting people that are willing to learn these new skill sets. And other than that, this is going to be a new game. And anybody that's a new designer, and they'll be able to develop a product line at very little cost, because your prototyping is pretty much gone. And that was the major cost in your production, was your first prototypes. And I've been in the industry for so long that I can remember making as many as 6 prototypes before we got one correct. Now we can actually design a prototype that'll fit a consumer based on all the technology that we have. So it's a lot. Everything has changed, and so it's a new game for those people that understand these technologies and are willing to use them. But that's where you asked on your interview, where do I have a problem at? Is just getting people to say, okay, I'm going to go away from. They think that the art is in the drawing. That is true, but on the other side of it, once it's drawn, what do you do with it?
Exactly. What do you do with it, and how do you produce it with the quality, right?
Right.
And every stitch counts.
Right. And
100%. 100% agree with you on that one. And really, it's, that you brought up an interesting point, but also, quality control isn't just about compliance, right? It's about really delivering consistent excellence that sustains premium pricing and the customer retention, right? In the era of rising operational costs, which we see this now more than ever, and it's going raising faster than we'd ever have. And real, to your point, and the real skill lies into scaling the quality processes without enduring the margins. To your point, this is where thinking about where the automations can come in, so that you can still keep the operational cost manageable and be able to compete within today's environment. And really thinking about, you brought up the technology aspect. We actually have Rob on the call from Swiss Precision Actives. And, they are another great company who is also integrating a technology of actually weaving copper within their fabrics and textiles, which really allows a true natural antimicrobial features for the products. So when we were talking about earlier about how do we drive maximum value through our private label, so think about it. If you're just, if you are thinking that your private label is going to be around fleece and tees type of product as an example, well, why not think about what other potential antimicrobial aspect that you can add on to that? Or I know Samuel is working with some of the heat waves that are coming in through the fabrics and kind of allow to do different things with the fabrications, give different features. So that could really drive maximum value to the customer and beyond just the price point, because now you're providing something that, first of all, doesn't exist, and something that you do much better than any of your competitors of the branded product. Now that I will be, as a consumer, more emotionally involved in your private label and stay connected with you because you are driving that maximum value to me. Does anybody else want to add anything before we move on to the next kind of talking about some of the point of how we can be able to balance the price with the quality? Rob, do you want to add anything?
Hey, yay. Thank
Hi.
you for the invitation. Thank you for having me. I appreciate the shout out. Yeah, I think it's very important to have an amazing product. As you know, my co-founder comes from Swiss Gear, so it's all about craftsmanship and quality. And when you deliver that, the use case is that the customer will pay for that, period. Otherwise, you were marketing down the wrong customer journey or targeting the wrong customer. Yes, there are sensitive customers that want a price point. We're all used to inexpensive labor, and it's highly costly to try to get manufacturing back into the US because the price point always drives, higher. That is the reality. So I would just say in this market, you have to diversify your supply chain. You have to have a unique fabric and material that differentiates yourself, especially new brands. and new designers coming into the market, because the larger brands have it down. They have patents, they have marketing budgets, they have the AI analytics to know what their competitors are doing. They have their entire supply chain down, logistics and supply chain all the way to direct to consumer. And then they have massive budgets to, place ads on Meta and Instagram and TikTok and compete on their Amazon platforms. So really, it's about having something unique and different outside of the design, respecting all designers and the creative aspect of something unique and different, but the material from our perspective has to have some unique benefit and value to the end user to separate yourself from whoever, Gap, Calvin Klein, Victoria's Secret, whatever fashionable textile business that you're in, that it has to come down to quality and a differentiator in the fabric. And then Ye's brilliant at working with small to medium sized to large brands at understanding how that supply chain should be diversified to save overhead, free up cash flow, and get either your B2B channels moving or your D2C or both. But it all comes down to the product. Of course, it's raising money and having the marketing to support it, but the unique value proposition in the textile, we can't just be, from our perspective, another Me Too product. We have uniforms, scrubs, t-shirts, underwear, socks, and you're talking about industries we go after in the 30 billion to 1.4 trillion dollar textile business, and there has to be something unique and different in our textile, which we have, that will separate us to be able to move in OEM partnerships for other brands, creating our own brand. But it's for us, we've gotten out of this petroleum-based textile that may use a small portion for the elasticity or spandex for washability and all of that until we invent something that comes from natural rubber or I would say other natural material that has that elastic piece of that elasticity for just so it doesn't biodegrade in a washing machine based on chemicals or heat. So it's just highly important to get into this movement of eco health, sustainability, and what makes our textile different. That's why we exist. Otherwise, there's no sense on all the energy and time in your beautiful designs. Just another Me Too, as far as I'm concerned, because there's just a saturation. Just walk through Forever 21 or any of them. It's just like, wow, they have the power of the money to just have inventory up the yin yang twins.
100%. Yeah, and I know Sam is also nodding because it's true. I mean, this is our pain point that we've been trying to get across.
He just brought a lot of things that into the picture that it's obvious that we're all in a new journey, and there's new opportunities here. And the people that open their minds up and see these opportunities are the ones. I don't see any major company as a competitor right now. They're not agile enough to make the transition that you're going to have to make to survive in this new business cycle that we're in. And it's all based on the consumer. The consumer right now has the power. 70% of our economy is consumption. And as tight as it is, they're going to be very cautious with how they spend their money going forward. So you're going to have to be on target with what you're making for these guys. And like you were saying a minute ago, the quantities of product that's out there that's not selling right now, there's no place to dump those goods right now. You can't dump them in South America or Mexico or anywhere now. They don't want them. They won't let you bring them in. So that's a liability now for those big companies. Also, the real estate is a liability. And with the digital world that we have now, you've eliminated the cost of your real estate. You've eliminated the cost of an employee. So your cost of goods are coming down and your margins are going up because you're eliminating all your major expenses. Your two largest expenses is real estate and employees. So that's gone. When you also bring it back to the U.S., and that's what we're focusing on is building factories. We have four factories actually built here that are on demand. We're not looking for mass production. We're looking for on-demand customization and bringing young designers in with new concepts that where their prototypes now don't have to take 6 prototypes to make a perfect sample. We can do that with technology and don't even have to make up a sample. We can do a digital sample now and wrap that around an avatar, and then it'll roll right into our plotter, which will lay the plotter out, the pattern out on the plotter. It'll run through a laser cutter, and that laser cutter will cut it to your exact size. So there's a new game out here now, and those big guys aren't agile enough to keep up with it. And all those inventories, they're going to eat them. There's nothing to do with them. They're
Right.
sitting there. They're dead weight right
You're bringing up a really great point, and actually that ties up to an interesting question that we just received. We've tried lean methods before, but we've struggled with the supplier pushback. Any advice on aligning suppliers with our process improvement goals? Really great question. And actually, this is really, we often see this a lot as well when we go in and optimize and transform supply chain. One of the things that we find successful when we are talking to our existing manufacturers that the ones we're trying to transform into the lean aspect is really tying your volume commitments or additional business incentives to quantifiable performance improvements, which is, really present the partnership to those factories as a win-win, right? So where you are going to help them to reduce the waste as well as you're going to, reduce the waste on your end, but it also helps it on their end. Really improve throughout the benefit of both parties, right? Sometimes we even see, if the brand is large enough and then we really have a factory that is potentially a key driver to our main assortment, especially within the private label, we sometimes even co-invest in training or share technology upgrades that can really unlock their new efficiencies while deepening the supplier loyalty, right? The goal is to treat those suppliers that you're trying to especially implement some of those lean methodology as your partners, not just as people who are going to execute on your design, but someone who will actually partner with you to be able to deliver that quality and maximized product with at the same time lean thinking in mind so that you can be able to reduce and cut some of that waste, which then eventually translates to cost savings. I mean, Sam, do you guys, what other ways do you are the factory, right? You guys are constantly getting approached by that. What else can we tell to a brand who is trying to, get on that path of lean, and what can they say to some of those factories to be able to really get them on board?
Well, basically, as you already know, China is changing over from a manufacturing country into a service-driven country, just like the U.S. So that's changing a lot of the issues on that end. And as far as Vietnam and Cambodia is where most of the factories are moving to now, there's going to be a supply chain issue there for the raw materials and all the accessories and things you need. They're building it, but it's not like China where you can turn goods quickly the way that you can do in China. And Bangladesh and all the other countries, Sri Lanka, those countries are having a lot of problems in the factories. They're shutting factories down left and right there. So so there's going to be an issue on that end as far as finding production for the large quantities as there is for the small quantities. And as far as the variables go, as we build this infrastructure, we're looking at it building from the ground up. One of the things we're working with is hemp. And we've got two patents on hemp that where we can degum it now. And we've already created 20 fabrics from denim to denim and tencel, hemp knits. And that's what we're rebuilding the country on is hemp. And so that's going to be our main fabric to rebuild with. As far as adding things, we have fibers that adjust the temperature. We've added a carbon fiber to the products that we can harvest the heat from your body, is what you were talking about earlier, turns it into far infrared, which reduces your cortisol level and increase your nitric oxide level. So there's all kinds of preventive medicine issues that we're going to be focusing on. So that's going to be some of the specialties that I forget the gentleman's name here earlier, that they
Rob.
yeah, those are some of the things that you're going to have to look at to make yourself differentiate. Just differentiate yourself from other companies, because as you already know, go into any store, that stuff is lined up on the racks for 50 off sales and still not returning. So it's a new game, and the young designers that you're bringing in, and you ask me, I'm glad I can show up here because I get to see all these young people that are willing to change the mindset up and go a different direction, and you're giving them an opportunity, and you're doing a great job of it.
Thank you. Thank you, Sam. Thank you for great input. And I really want to, because, as we're wrapping up, to think about if you are private label, who is just another brand on the shelf, then you're really missing the biggest advantage, right? Is exclusivity and brand reinforcement. Instead of competing on price, like we've been talking about this whole hour, is really thinking about, what would be the core revenue driver based on the on a value that you're providing to your customer, right? So it's really thinking about how do we position our private label based on value versus just trying to compete on the price point. The ones that private labels can be really a strategic growth engine rather than they're just being a side project especially for retailers. From adopting premium positioning to launching limited edition lines. This could be another great aspect of, again, still focusing on the core, but potentially limited edition in terms of the functionalities that particular t-shirt or fleece can do. And utilizing some of these new technologies that we've heard on this call would be a great way to do this. Thinking about, how to create different private labels as a bolster of the brand equity, right? While driving the robust margins. So while you are, cutting out the middleman, and yes, you are now operating on higher margins for private label in general, one of the things is to really think about how do you get that customer acquisition to turn them into a loyal customers for life. And again, the only way to do that is if you're going to emotionally connect with them and drive maximum value to them, not the price point, but because price point, they will just turn around and then switch you the next day when somebody else comes out with something a little bit more cheaper. Thinking about us when we build private label is building it just same as you would build it for a branded product, is the identity, right? What is going to really differentiate you from the national brands? But at the same time, what would that be, that step higher of what you're going to deliver in terms of value based on some of the national brands that you potentially carry, right? Thinking about elevating your narrative for the private label that aligns with sustainability, with craftsmanship, with innovation. Those would be the key aspects that a lot of our branded partners, big giants are not able to keep up. To your point, they're not able to do it as fast and as agile as you're potentially, who is just starting up in this private label world and can be able to partner with the right factories and manufacturers who already working on lean, and at the same time also be able to deliver some of the key functionalities that we just talked about. Another great thing about private label is the pricing strategy, and having the dynamic pricing that really allows you really using your dynamic pricing models that are data driven, and that are adjustments that you can be able to create based on a spike in your channel, or your on a spike in the drops within your channel that performs, right? Because you have the actual real-time data that's coming in, that you are able to make those adjustments with some of the predictive analytics and your dynamic pricing models. Really thinking about the exclusive positioning, right? About your loyalty programs, like limited drops that you're potentially doing, or collaborations. That's another really great way of doing a private label and focusing based on collaborating with potentially either other brands or potentially other artists, or depending on what's important to your consumer, or be able to bring in and make that collaboration work so that it not only again emotionally connects to the customer because they have a huge following base of whomever you're collaborating with, or a lot of times it's the value driving, right? So if you are collaborating with Levi's as part of you building your private label, then potentially that also comes with a huge tail of trust in Levi's that now can be able to carry it over to your private label. So thinking about some of those strategic partnerships and collaboration within your private label program is going to be very important. And thinking about, like I mentioned, about the limited drops, because one of the things that, again, the customer loves is that anticipation of something that they will be the first ones to get. And they will be the only ones to have it, once that supply ends. Now, you can later on take that unlimited drop and turn it into a mass sales. But a lot of times, some of those releases, especially of new technology integrations into your private label, could be potentially done really well through unlimited drops. Last question that I'm going to take today, and I'm going to address all of your questions, guys, offline, later on through the channels. So, please do share your contact information if your question has not been addressed. We've heard about dynamic pricing, but we're concerned about customer backslash if prices fluctuate. Is that worth the risk? Really great question. Really depends on what your sales strategy really is. And really, you have to execute it carefully. Dynamic pricing is highly effective, right? Focusing on incremental adjustments rather than wide swing, right? Using a historical data, channel performance, competitor activities to make nearly real-time tweaks. And you are tweaking them constantly up and down, depending, sometimes if it fluctuates, even depending on the time of the day, that you are able to do this. Now, for the customer, a lot of times it's very transparent. They're not able to see it. So again, as long as you're making incremental shifts, not something drastic and huge, but be transparent about the adding value or exclusivity, which can justify premium pricing while mitigating any kind of perception of the price gauging, right? So the goal is really for the customer not to feel that they're being fooled or they've been trying to be overcharged. So as long as your value that you're delivering with your product matches to the dynamic pricing models that you're creating to believe, then you're going to be fine. You're going to be safe. This is absolutely normal thing to do within our industry. However, what we would see that a lot of times gets pitfalls is when the brand starts to really elevate their pricing marginally by, multiple dollars at the time. And but there's no added value to that. And that's when it becomes to where the customer starts to kind of like be cautious about how your pricing strategy actually works. With that, anybody else wants to add any kind of last minute thoughts before we're going to wrap up our roundtable? And we do host this roundtables every first Tuesday of the month. And we do post new topics that we're going to discuss ahead of time on our LinkedIn page at Yay Design. So please feel free to always follow and check to see what topics we're going to discuss next.